Freeholder is a story of fire, fury, and first principles. In the summer of 1676, Virginia cracked open. Poor farmers, indentured servants, and frontier settlers, men who owned little but their labor and their land, rose up against a colonial elite they believed had betrayed them. Led by the fierce and doomed Nathaniel Bacon, they turned their anger not only on native nations at the margins, but on the governors, merchants, and grandees at the center of power. Jamestown burned. Authority panicked. The idea of who truly owned Virginia was suddenly up for grabs. This audiobook tells that story from the ground level, the freeholders and near-freeholders, the small men with big grievances, caught between hunger, fear, ambition, and a dangerous new taste of political voice. Freeholder is not a tidy morality tale. It is a raw, unsettled account of rebellion in its earliest American form, where liberty, violence, race, and class collide before anyone knows what the rules will be. What happened in 1676 did not stay in 1676. Listen closely, you can still hear it echo. This Aquitaine production is read by Zuben el-Janubi. In a room adorned with regal tapestries and ornate wooden carvings, the atmosphere is tense. King Charles II sits on his throne, a composition of dignity and impatience. Known as a sovereign more concerned with the boudoir than the throne room, he was quick to make decisions, relying on advice. A committee of stern-faced men enter, holding a sheaf of parchment that seems to weigh far more than mere paper should. The leader of the committee advances and intones, "Your Majesty, we have concluded our investigation into the conduct of both Governor Berkeley and Nathaniel Bacon towards the native tribes." In the dimly lit chambers of the Palace of Whitehall, Charles II of England reclined in an opulent chair, a tapestry of contradictions woven into his very being. A king restored to the throne, yet forever haunted by the scaffold that claimed his father's life. His visage bore a merry charm that belied the calculating intellect lurking beneath his warm brown eyes. A torrent of curls cascaded around his countenance like a mane, as though nature itself ordained him a lion among men. He was a ruler whose reign danced between the somber shadows of Cromwell's puritanical past and the luminous dawn of the Enlightenment. Intrigue thrived in his court as much as the sciences. The likes of Newton and Wren were as welcome as the mistresses and courtiers who often dominated the royal bedchamber. Charles was both a statesman and a sybarite. In his hands, the scepter often felt as light as a conductor's baton, orchestrating an era known for its arts and infamous for its excesses. His wardrobe was an epitome of flamboyance, embellished with velvets and brocades, as if he sought to defy the austere years of the Commonwealth with every thread and stitch. Yet hidden within the recesses of his ornate attire were often letters of grave import, missives from spies, maybe an unsigned declaration, or secret treaties that could alter the fate of nations.
A man of appetites, Charles indulged not only in the pleasures of the flesh, but also in the joys of the intellect. He held in one hand a goblet of fine French wine, and in the other a newly published manuscript on the philosophy of governance. He was not a king confined to the narrow lanes of dogma. He meandered through the broad avenues of possibility, testing the boundaries of tradition and authority. Though a monarch in a constitutional realm, Charles II was no mere figurehead. He grappled continuously with the powers of Parliament, embodying the tension that would define English governance for generations to come. He was the light-hearted king who bore the weight of a nation's expectations, an enigma wrapped in royal robes. And so, as the candlelight flickered across his face, casting shadows that seemed to dance to the silent music of his thoughts, Charles II of England sat, a living paradox, an emblem of an age that was as golden as it was tarnished. Charles brushes away a fly. "Well, speak then. What are your findings? Sire, regrettably, both parties have acted against the interests of peace and fairness in the realm. Governor Berkeley's tax policies have put an unnecessary burden on the farmers and native tribes, while Nathaniel Bacon's actions can only be described as incendiary, inciting violence and mistrust. King Charles II leans back, feeling a little stiffness there. His eyes narrow as he digests the information. He puts on his pronouncement face. This is most troubling indeed. Neither peace nor prosperity can be built on a foundation of inequity and violence. Both will be held accountable for their actions. In a chamber designed to accommodate both audiences and petitions, the mere presence of the committee's weighty report engenders a profound sense of anticipation. This looming shadow, stretching ominously across the assembled individuals, serves as an ominous harbinger, suggesting the intricate and challenging journey that lies ahead for the entire realm. In the year 1670, the colony of Virginia stood as a land filled with promises and challenges, where opportunity and strife coexisted amid the backdrop of tobacco leaves drying in the sun. Across the ocean, King Charles II's reign had brought a semblance of stability to England, yet in the distant realm of Virginia, the echoes of the Restoration seemed faint and distant. Within this new world, the settlers' insatiable thirst for wealth perpetually clashed with the unforgiving forces of untamed nature, the presence of native populations, and the harsh realities of indentured servitude. It was an era when dreams of prosperity mingled with the struggles of survival, forging a complex tapestry of life in colonial Virginia. King Charles II had issued various land grants, hoping that the increased production of tobacco would fill England's coffers. The Navigation Acts passed under Charles II tightened England's economic hold, ensuring that the colony was tethered firmly to the motherland. Yet they also gave rise to smugglers and buccaneers who viewed the acts as nothing more than lines on a map. Governor William Berkeley had his hands full trying to enforce the king's laws while attending to the numerous grievances of the colonists and, less openly, the natives.
Within the governor's mansion, a portrait of King Charles II held its prominent place. The mirthful monarch's countenance appeared to bear a subtle, knowing smile, as if he were party to a private jest. In that moment, the grand stage of the Restoration felt distant and detached, its courtly comedies and tragedies having little relevance to the harsh reality of daily survival in Virginia. The presence of the king's image served as a poignant reminder that Virginia, despite its untamed potential, was an integral part of a larger tapestry. It was a tapestry woven together by the threads of ambition, power, and the unyielding grasp of history, where the colonists navigated their journey within the grand narrative of their time. Governor William Berkeley, a man of regal bearing and genteel manners, stood as an anomaly in the wilderness of Virginia. Educated at Oxford and well-versed in the art of governance, he had been appointed by King Charles II to bring a sense of English civility to this unruly corner of the empire. His imposing mansion, equipped with one of the few libraries in the colony, often hosted gatherings where the air was thick with the perfume of tobacco and European sophistication. However, Berkeley was not just a well-heeled Englishman in borrowed American feathers. He had grasped the intricacies of colonial rule, straddling the tenuous lines between the settlers' ceaseless appetite for land and the disenfranchised native tribes, between the profit-driven desires of the English crown and the colonists' increasing hunger for autonomy. With a deft touch, he upheld the Navigation Acts to the satisfaction of the distant king, while quietly sympathizing with the beleaguered planters who bemoaned them. As the sun set over the James River, Governor Berkeley would often find himself in his opulent study, poring over dispatches from London. The missives were filled with directives and news from the Restoration Court, a world that, with each passing day, felt increasingly remote. Surrounded by law books, navigational maps, and his beloved collection of classical texts, he would reflect on the immense responsibility entrusted to him. Berkeley's dual role as both governor and landlord was not lost on him. His vast estate, Green Spring Plantation, was a microcosm of the colony he governed. The tobacco fields were tilled by indentured servants whose contracts he examined carefully, always aware that these souls sought to build their own version of prosperity on Virginian soil. Despite his polished exterior, the weight of the colony gnawed at him. With each directive from King Charles II, each confrontation with agitated colonists, and each report of skirmishes with the Powhatan tribes, Governor Berkeley was reminded of the volatile blend of greed, ambition, and desperation that defined his New World domain. As he endeavored to transplant English social and legal frameworks onto Virginian society, the relentless wilderness, both in its physical form and through the resilience of the native population, continued to encroach. It stubbornly resisted simple governance, posing a formidable challenge to the governor's efforts to impose order and structure on this untamed land. In the shadowed recesses of his study, lit only by the flicker of a solitary candle, Governor William Berkeley found himself at the fulcrum of history, caught between allegiance to a distant king and the pressing needs of a restless colony. There, amidst the scent of parchment and wax, he pondered the malleable future of Virginia, keenly aware that the choices he made would reverberate through the colony for generations to come.
And so, under the rule of Charles II, Virginia continued its uneasy march toward the future, a land filled with promise and peril, its people forever caught between the dream of untold wealth and the harsh, often bloody realities of a new world trying desperately to mold itself in the image of the old. The landscape of Virginia was divided between sprawling tobacco plantations and humble farms, with Virginia's society a cauldron of simmering tensions. Wealthy settlers reveled in the profits from their tobacco crops, easily covering the colonial taxes imposed by Governor Berkeley. Their affluence granted them not just material comforts, but a seat at the political table, their voices amplified through the power of land ownership and suffrage. Yet, for the poorer Virginians, the system was a stranglehold. The steep decline in tobacco prices had turned many small farms into financial sinkholes. These men and women felt invisible, their concerns falling on deaf ears in a political system that only listened to landowners. Their gaze often turned westward, where the untamed frontier beckoned with the promise of fertile soil and new beginnings. However, this frontier was not an empty canvas waiting to be painted in colonial hues. It was home to Native American tribes intent on safeguarding their ancestral lands. When skirmishes erupted, the settlers looked to Governor Berkeley for military aid. Their pleas met with a wall of silence, fueling an ever-growing resentment. In this socio-economic powder keg, the lines between settlers and indigenous tribes, rich and poor, empowered and disenfranchised, became battle lines. The governor's refusal to send military support was not just a policy decision, it was a spark on dry tinder, setting the stage for conflicts that would erupt from these divisions, questioning the very foundations of colonial rule. In the high-ceilinged council chamber, adorned with official coats of arms, Governor Berkeley sits at the head of a long table, flanked by his councilmen. Seated across from him are Queen Kakakoski and her son, John West, who belong to the Pamunkey tribe. The chairs they occupy seem to be less grand by design, yet they exude an air of dignity and grace befitting their status as representatives of their community. The presence of the Queen and her son adds an element of richness and depth to the scene, as they are poised and attentive, their eyes fixed on the speaker with a sense of curiosity and respect. The air is thick with tension and historical grievance. Berkeley leaned against the dark mahogany table, arms crossed, a deep frown etching lines into his forehead. The room, filled with a haze of cigar smoke and the tension of unspoken fears, seemed to grow even smaller at his words. 12 men won't suffice, given the risks we all face. Your contribution seems rather meager. Berkeley pushed himself off the table, taking a few deliberate steps toward the Queen. Quality isn't our issue here, ma'am. It's scale.
We are dealing with an enemy that has numbers and resources far beyond what we've ever encountered. 12 men, no matter how skilled, are a drop in the ocean. In a room thick with both tension and the smell of cigar smoke, Queen Kakakowski confronted Governor Berkeley in the high-stakes negotiation. Considering the sacrifices we've already made for your colony, 12 is generous, she boldly asserts, invoking the legacy of lost warriors and a history of uneasy peace. Unmoved, Berkeley replies, "Your grievances are noted, but we live in the present. The hostile tribes are a common enemy."
The Pamunkey tribe, the people of the river, have roamed the forests and fished the waters of Virginia long before English sails ever graced the horizon. Living along the sinuous stretches of the Pamunkey River, they were a people bound by ancient customs, governed by a complex hierarchy of chieftains and shamans. Deeply spiritual, their world was a tapestry woven from the threads of nature, each stone, tree, and river possessing a life force that spoke to those who knew how to listen. To the Queen, Governor William Berkeley was a puzzle, a leader who spoke of peace yet whose people seemed to harbor an insatiable hunger for land. She was no naive dreamer and knew the alliance with the English was a double-edged sword. It promised the allure of European trade goods, metal tools, firearms, blankets, but it also ushered in a creeping dread that the Pamunkey way of life, their very essence, was slipping through their fingers like grains of river sand. In this sacred grove, the air was alive with the spirit of the tribe's ancestors. These ancient oak trees, towering and majestic, had witnessed countless seasons and stood as guardians of the tribe's history. Their gnarled branches, draped in moss, seemed to reach out as if offering wisdom gathered over centuries. The rustling of their leaves was like a soft chorus, a reminder of the enduring connection between the tribe and the land. Beneath these watchful trees, the ground was dappled with sunlight, filtering through the dense canopy. The earth here was hallowed, trodden upon by generations of the tribe's bravest warriors. It was here that the young warriors of the tribe honed their skills in archery, a revered art passed down through generations. With each arrow nocked and released, they not only practiced a vital skill for hunting and defense, but also engaged in a rite of passage, a step towards their future roles as protectors and leaders. Their laughter and shouts, lively and spirited, resonated through the forest, blending with the sounds of nature. These sounds were a testament to the vigor and resilience of the tribe, a vibrant contrast to the silent, solemn oaks. Yet there was harmony in this contrast, the exuberance of youth meeting the steady calm of age. In these moments of practice, the young warriors were not just learning to aim and shoot, they were absorbing the lessons of the forest, the discipline of the bow, and the values of their people. The forest was their teacher, and every tree, every whispering leaf imparted the wisdom of the land. This place, where the sacred and the everyday met, was a microcosm of the tribe's world, a world where respect for nature, tradition, and each other was paramount. Here, in the shadow of the ancient oaks, the future of the tribe was being shaped, one arrow at a time. Nearby, the women would gather, weaving intricate baskets from river reeds and sharing the wisdom of generations. But among the elders, the mood was somber. The drumbeats and chants, once an invocation for prosperity, now seemed like a plea to the spirits to preserve their fading world. And so, as Governor Berkeley extended his hand in a semblance of friendship, offering treaties inked in a language foreign to the Pamunkey, Werewance faced a grave decision. Would he tether his people's fate to these newcomers, with their strange customs and inscrutable motives? Or would he risk the wrath of their firearms and continue to resist, to fight for the land that pulsed through the veins of every Pamunkey man, woman, and child? In the soft light of the setting sun, casting a golden glow over the rippling waters of the Pamunkey River, Kakakowski stood alone, deep in thought. In that moment, she understood she was not just choosing for herself or even for his tribe, but for generations yet unborn. With a heavy heart, she turned and walked back to his people, her decision etched in the lines of his face, a silent testament to the enduring struggle of the Pamunkey tribe in an ever-changing world. A common enemy often birthed by common injustice, would you not agree, Governor? Berkeley deflects. That's a debate for another day, but is soon cornered by Kakakowski's compelling proposal. Authority over the Rappahannock and Chickahominy tribes, she declares, is not merely ambitious, it's just. And if I grant this, I need more than 12 warriors, counters Berkeley, but the Queen has the final word. If you grant this, then you recognize our sovereignty, not as subjects to your king, but as allies. Then, Governor, you will have more than just warriors. You'll have our lasting partnership. Berkeley takes a moment to deliberate, his eyes meeting those of each councilman seated around the heavy table. He senses the weight of years, treaties, and lives lost resting on his shoulders. The room is a silent echo chamber of past decisions, some regrettable and others laudable, all converging to this singular moment. Finally, Berkeley speaks, his voice tinged with a gravitas that seems to draw the room's unspoken history into each word. Very well, Queen Kokokoski. You will have your authority over the tribes, and we will welcome your alliance, not your subjugation. Across the table, Kokokoski nods, her face revealing a glimmer of triumph, and perhaps for the first time in many months, a glint of hope. Then consider the alliance sealed, Governor Berkeley. My son will lead 24 warriors, double your initial request, as a testament to this new path we forged today. The gravity of her words hang in the air as Queen Kokokoski and John West make their way to the chamber door. As it closes behind them, the room seems to let out a collective breath, as if released from a spell. Berkeley sits back, his eyes meeting those of his councilmen once more, this time with a newfound resolve. Councilman Adams, a long-serving member, leans in and mutters, "Well, Governor, it seems we've just made history." Berkeley nods but says nothing, aware that such moments are but stepping stones in the long, fraught journey they all must travel. As the room begins to empty, the awareness settles in that history isn't just a past recounted in dusty tomes and whispered legends. It's being written here and now, even in rooms like these, where the complex choreography of power and resistance dances in a constant, evolving waltz. The ink is still wet, and the future, fraught with both peril and promise, is yet undecided. Inside the dimly lit council chamber, heavy wooden paneling and austere portraits add gravitas to the space. Governor Berkeley presides over the session, seated at the head of an elongated table, attempting to walk a precarious line between governance and personal enrichment. The air is thick with tension, echoing centuries-old conflicts carried across the Atlantic. Berkeley stood at the head of the room, his eyes sweeping over the assembly of councilmen, soldiers, and freeholders who had gathered to discuss the future of the colony. "Gentlemen, we must diversify our economic foundation, act as Christians, and maintain diplomatic relations with the native tribes," he began, laying out his vision with the air of someone who believed that reason could be the balm to heal all wounds. From the back, a John Goodwin, mud still clinging to his boots, rose to speak. "And what of us, the ones who actually till this soil, who break our backs on land owned by faceless nobles back in England?" Berkeley's eyes narrowed slightly, as if the man had committed some minor but noticeable social gaffe. "They've invested in this colony under the King's Charter," he replied, exuding the kind of composed authority that comes from years of governance. "That's the arrangement, like it or not." The freeholder's face flushed with a mix of indignation and urgency. "An arrangement that echoes the subjugation of Ireland. Are we to become the next Irish, landless tenants in our own homeland?" His words struck a chord. Murmurs spread through the room, touching even the most stoic councilmen who sat around Berkeley. They all knew the Irish example well, a land seized, its people relegated to serfs on their own soil, all in the name of English progress and civilization. Berkeley felt the weight of the room shift, the balance of power teetering on the edge of a blade. He looked at the Goodwin, then to his councilmen, and back again. "The King's Charter and the nobles' investments provide the framework," he began cautiously, "but frameworks can be adjusted. However, any change must be beneficial for all parties involved." Goodwin sat down, his point made, but his eyes remained locked onto Berkeley. His gaze seemed to say, "This isn't over. The terms may change, but the struggle for fair representation and economic justice is far from settled." As the assembly moved on to other issues, trade agreements, military alliances, and the colony's burgeoning infrastructure, Berkeley couldn't shake the freeholders' words from his mind. They echoed as a stark reminder that while diplomatic relations with native tribes were crucial, the colony's internal fabric was also fraying at the edges. Berkeley leaned on the intricately carved wooden table at the head of the room, his eyes narrowing as he took in the freeholders' words. "The circumstances are what they are," he retorted, his voice tinged with a note of finality. "My role is to govern within those parameters." Goodwin shot back, his tone tinged with frustration and an undercurrent of resentment. "Yet you resist our demands to expel or exterminate the natives. We consider ourselves the new natives." Berkeley's gaze sharpened. "You are subjects of the English crown, just as I am. Our duty is to uphold the treaties with the native tribes." His voice left no room for interpretation. Treaties for him were the bedrock on which any civilized society stood. "But what of our demands for better governance?" The freeholder was relentless, sensing perhaps that the room's attention was pivoting toward him. "We also protest the rampant corruption in this government, inefficiency that manifests itself most clearly during wartime." Berkeley paused, taking a moment to choose his words carefully. The room was thick with tension, a tinderbox awaiting a spark. "Protest is your right as Englishmen," finally he conceded. "But understand this, the system may be flawed, but it's the system we operate within." Goodwin sat down, a ripple of murmured conversation spreading across the room. Each man pondered the complexities now laid bare, the tension between colonial governance and the rights of settlers, the moral and diplomatic imperatives to honor treaties with native tribes, and the growing discontent about corruption and inefficiency.
Berkeley's words hung heavy in the air, a tacit acknowledgment that while he was bound by the rules of a distant crown and cumbersome bureaucracy, he was not deaf to the growing discontent. Yet it was also a warning that the machinery of governance, however flawed, had its own momentum. Those who sought to disrupt it should tread carefully. It was clear that Berkeley's role as a colonial governor was fraught with a web of complexities, legal, ethical, and human. And though the room had emptied, the issues remained, as resilient and thorny as ever. The real work, Berkeley knew, was not in managing land or resources, but in navigating the perilous human terrain that could tip the balance of an entire colony into chaos or coexistence. The conversation seems to reach a stalemate, reflecting the inherent contradictions and tensions of a colonial system born of distant economic interests and local realities. Governor Berkeley remains stoic, yet the room simmers with the frustration of men who feel increasingly alienated in their own land. It's a tenuous balance, a governance tightrope that teeters over a chasm filled with the echoes of Irish rebellion and indigenous resistance, a chasm that widens with each unheeded voice. The sun was setting, casting a long, golden light across the expanse of the Stafford Fort's walls. The timbers of the fort seemed almost to creak in the waning heat as two men walked along a dusty path, their faces weathered by years of harsh living and the toil of frontier life. They moved with the deliberate pace of man accustomed to treading carefully in unknown woods. Man one glanced sideways, his gaze lingering on the fort's walls. "Can't say I'm surprised. Matthews had it comin', cheatin' those dogs like he did." Man two shook his head, his eyes narrowing as if trying to peer into some unfathomable darkness. "Still, death's a steep price for his misdeeds. It was gruesome, enough to make a grown man wince." "Matthews might have been the catalyst, but you and I both know he ain't the root of the problem," Man one replied, shifting the weight of the musket slung over his shoulder. "You watch, this is just the spark. They're talking about calling up the militia." Man two chuckled grimly.
Those buffoons? They'd be more likely to shoot themselves than find an Indian. Man 1 nodded, exhaling a long, slow breath that seemed to draw the tension out of him. Ain't that the truth? Militia or no militia, we're sitting on a powder keg, friend. As they approached the fort, the weight of the situation seemed to settle over them like a shroud. They each sensed that the Dogue Indian raid was not just an isolated incident, but a precursor to deeper, more intricate issues plaguing the colony. For all the supposed civility that colonial life promised, the reality was a volatile mix of conflicting interests, cultural collisions, and resource scarcity, all against a backdrop of deep-seated mistrust and fear. In the heart of Virginia's rolling landscape, where rivers meander like veins through the earth, lived the Dogue tribe. Their territory, lush and fertile, was tucked away along the Potomac River, a winding stretch of water that had for centuries been the lifeblood of their people. Governed by an intricate social structure and guided by the wisdom of their elders, the Dogues stood as a tribe distinct, yet deeply connected to the various Algonquian-speaking communities in the region. To the men, the recent raid was more than just a grim tale of frontier violence. It was a chilling omen. Matthews may have lit this fire with his duplicity, but it was the community, divided in their sentiments, shaky in their alliances, and uncertain in their course, that provided the kindling.
As they entered the fort, leaving behind them the closing darkness, both men felt a mounting sense of unease. It was as if the very air were thickening, laden with foreboding. Like many in Stafford, they saw dark clouds gathering on the horizon, but what neither could see was how or when the storm would break, only that the atmosphere was charged, and the tempest, when it came, would spare no one. Amid the untamed expanse of colonial Virginia, a ragtag militia stood poised at a fork in a well-trodden path, a tableau of men burdened by both muskets and moral quandaries. Their faces, stubbled and dirt-smudged, looked to their captain and lieutenant as clouds gathered overhead, thick and foreboding, nature itself seeming to anticipate their choice. The captain eyed the horizon, then glanced back at his men, a motley assembly whose uniforms were as tarnished as their own notions of justice and duty. "We take the left fork," he announced. The lieutenant's eyes narrowed. "Sir, the left leads to Susquehannock land. We were tasked with the Dogues." "Tell me, Lieutenant, how much gold have you got?" Captain shot back, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Not a single coin, sir." Captain smirked. "And how much do you reckon the Dogues have?" "Doubt they have much, sir," Lieutenant replied, his voice tinged with disdain he couldn't fully disguise. "Then what does it matter which tribe suffers? We head left and raid the Susquehannocks. At least we might find something of value there." The lieutenant hesitated. "But it should matter, sir. We're meant to be upholding some semblance of law and order, not pillaging at will." The captain leaned in closer, his eyes locking onto the lieutenant's. "Aye, but who's to say where law ends and necessity begins?" The weight of the captain's question hung in the air, mingling with the musty scent of wet earth and the growing restlessness of the men. Finally, Lieutenant exhaled, letting go of a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Very well. Attention, men. Forward march." With that, the militia advanced down the left fork, their footsteps heavy with the weight of their decision. As they moved deeper into Susquehannock territory, each man was left to grapple with his own ethical compromises. The path they chose was about more than geography. It was an inward journey, one fraught with ethical fog and personal demons. And as the first droplets of rain began to fall, it became ever clearer that they were stepping not just into another tribe's land, but also into a murky realm, where the boundaries between right and wrong seemed as twisted and tangled as the forest that closed in around them. With a sense of foreboding, the men turn left at the crossroads, boots splashing through muddy puddles as they move in formation towards Susquehannock territory. They march with mixed feelings, aware that they are crossing a moral line almost as distinct as the territorial one.
Inside the stately governor's mansion, the air is thick with tension and the musty scent of ink and parchment. Governor Calvert of Maryland sits at his ornate desk, dominated by an array of papers, quills, and official seals. His face bears an expression caught between irritation and concern, as if trying to balance the heavy responsibilities of governance with the indignities recently suffered. Calvert shakes his head in disbelief. This is an affront not merely to Maryland, but to the very principles of colonial governance. How can Berkeley allow his militia to intrude upon Susquehannock land under our jurisdiction? His aide, a middle-aged man with a sober countenance, nods in agreement. "Shall we draft a formal complaint, sir?"
"Yes, but make it stern," Calvert commands, leaning back in his high-backed chair as if the weight of his responsibilities has suddenly increased. "This brazen act cannot be ignored. We must insist that Governor Berkeley hold those responsible to account." "Very well, sir. It shall be as strongly worded as diplomacy allows," the aide assures him, already moving toward a fresh sheet of parchment. Calvert pauses, his eyes momentarily drifting toward a map of the colonies that hangs on the wall, a patchwork of territories whose boundaries are not just geographical, but political, defined by decades of uneasy alliances and simmering hostilities. "Good," he finally says, locking eyes with his aide, "and add that such acts threaten not only our relations with the native tribes, but also the precarious peace among the colonies." The aide nods, acutely aware of the gravity of the situation. "Absolutely, sir. The message will convey the urgency and severity of the matter." As the aide sets ink to paper, Governor Calvert leans back, pondering the intricate web of relations that connect these colonies, each a separate entity, and yet all inextricably bound by the threads of shared history and uncertain future. The latest action by Virginia's militia is more than a territorial violation. It's a fissure in the already fragile landscape of colonial diplomacy, one that could easily widen into a chasm if not promptly addressed. Calvert's thoughts are interrupted by the scratching of his aide's quill, a tangible reminder that each word written now could tip the scales either toward reconciliation or conflict. And as he looks out his window at the rolling Maryland countryside, he wonders how many more such difficult decisions await him, each carrying the potential to shape not just the politics of a young nation, but the lives of its people. The aide nods, taking his leave to draft the letter that will carry Maryland's protest southward to Virginia's Governor Berkeley. Calvert leans back, troubled by the growing lawlessness and how it portends a fracturing of colonial unity. The militia's incursion is a reckless gamble, one that risks igniting a conflagration that could consume both colonies and leave neither unscarred. In a trading camp situated perilously close to Susquehannock territory, the tensions are high. Traders, trappers, and colonists are busy with their usual tasks, but there's a sense of heightened alertness. The Virginia militia's incursion has not gone unnoticed, nor answered. From the edge of the forest, a band of Susquehannock warriors emerges. Their faces are painted for war, and their bows are strung taut. In a swift, coordinated movement, they release a volley of arrows into the camp. A trader shouts, "Take cover!" "God save us! It's Susquehannocks!" another cried out. People dove for whatever cover they can find, behind barrels, carts, or even into the simple structures that make up the camp. Another volley of arrows flies, striking goods and grazing limbs. Men were trying to get organized. A voice shouted, "This is a bloody mess. We need to fight back." "With what? We're traders, not soldiers. We've got to do something. Send word to Maryland and Virginia." The raid is swift but effective. The Susquehannocks make it clear that they can and will defend their territory. Then, as quickly as they came, they vanish into the forest, leaving the trading camp in disarray and its inhabitants in a state of shock. As some traders scramble to send messengers to Maryland and Virginia, others tend to the wounded and assess the damage. The realization sets in that the Virginia militia's rogue actions have provoked a dangerous ripple effect. The cost of their incursion is now measured not just in lost goods and bruised egos, but in the fragile peace that has been shattered, perhaps irreparably.
In the fortified Susquehannock village, tension hangs thick in the air as the community prepares for another incursion. They don't have to wait long. Emerging from the surrounding forests, Maryland and Virginia militias converge, weapons primed. Led by Colonel Harris, a small contingent approaches the village, a white flag of truce raised high. After a fraught discussion among themselves, 5 Susquehannock chiefs agree to parley, believing in the sanctity of diplomatic engagement even in these turbulent times.
Chief Fierce Bear holds up his hand. "We come in peace, as you seem to. What are your terms?" "We wish to talk about land, resources," Colonel Harris responded, "and a future where both our peoples can coexist." Just as the chiefs let their guard down, the unthinkable happens. A volley of musket fire erupts from the tree line, cutting down the chiefs and their diplomat. West is disgusted by the gruesome spectacle. "You let this happen. These are not warriors you're attacking, but families. If they stand in the way of progress, they're collateral damage," Bacon says as he sizes up a teenage Pamunkey girl. West tries to dissuade him. "And what of your soul, Bacon? What damage does this do to you?" "I do what I must, for the people." A power-mad Bacon screams as he ties the girl to a slave coffle. West challenges him. "These are people too, innocent people."
For a moment, Bacon's eyes meet West's, and in that moment, even he seems uncertain of the righteousness of his cause. But he hardens his gaze, reaffirming his path. Bacon says, "This is war, West, the unfortunate cost of progress." John West looks at the chaos around him, his eyes filled with disbelief and sorrow. The tension of the moment isn't just between 2 men, but between 2 eras, 2 philosophies, and perhaps even 2 futures. West says quietly under his breath, "If this is progress, then may God help us all." He turns away and heads for home. Bacon's men continue their rampage near the section of the waterfront designated for fishing and transportation. They smash the canoes made from hollowed-out logs, tear up fishing nets, and break into the smokehouse, grabbing handfuls of the preserved fish. At Bacon's homestead, the air is tense, as if the very earth understands the gravity of what's unfolding. Soldiers loyal to Berkeley arrive, their red coats contrasting sharply with the rustic surroundings. Bacon, aware of his inevitable arrest, meets them at the door. Corporal Leeds speaks with official sonority. "Nathaniel Bacon, you are under arrest by the order of Governor Berkeley." Bacon is exultant. "Ah, the governor finally remembers I exist. Very well, let's not keep him waiting." Later that night, Bacon in a cell, temporarily stripped of his assumed power, contemplated his next move. Outside, the sound of voices grows louder, his supporters demanding his release. In the governor's council chamber, where Berkeley sits, uncomfortable and outnumbered, a messenger bursts in. "Governor Berkeley, the people demand new legislative elections. They have released Bacon." Berkeley, showing signs of strain, acquiesces. "So it be. Let the elections be held." Bacon walks triumphantly to his plantation, now a place of celebration. Bacon has been reinstated, not only a free man, but now legitimized by a popular mandate. Bacon speaks from his porch to the people who accompanied him home. "The winds are shifting, my friends. The old ways are giving in to the new. Let's prepare. This is only the beginning." Even as he revels in his victory, there's an uneasy realization that this contest between old and new, between authority and insurrection, is far from over. The consequences of this political power play are as unpredictable as they are inevitable. In the dense wilderness near Dragon Swamp days later, Bacon's men advanced with grim determination. The air was thick with tension, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying foliage. The Pamunkeys, caught in the eye of the storm, had no choice but to retreat into the swamp's labyrinthine channels. It was a place filled with the churning sounds of hidden creatures and overgrown with ancient trees, their limbs twisted like the histories that brought both parties to this precarious moment. For Bacon's men, victory was in sight, but the swamp itself presented a silent, lurking challenge that none could ignore. The Occaneechi had lived in the south on the Roanoke River, which they revered as Moritok. The arrival of Europeans had disrupted the Occaneechi way of life. The impact of diseases, encroachment on their land, and conflicts led to a decline in their population, and now they were reduced to robbing and raiding as allies to Bacon's forces. But now they had managed the unthinkable, capturing a formidable Susquehannock fort. Sweat and dirt marred their faces, but their eyes gleamed with triumph. It was a hard-won victory, wrought from courage and the kind of tactical ingenuity born of desperation. Yet when Bacon's men arrived, they demanded all the spoils, despite having contributed nothing to the blood and sweat of the battle. Betrayal was brewing in the midst of victory. Later, the same men who had laid claim to the Occaneechi's hard-won spoils turned their weapons on their erstwhile allies. With calculated treachery, Bacon's forces launched an attack on Occaneechi town. The air, once filled with the harmony of community, was now rife with the acrid stench of gunpowder and the anguished cries of men, women, and children. It was a massacre, a dark chapter in an unfolding saga, where the lines between friend and foe blurred into an indistinguishable smear of human suffering. Once, the Occaneechi way of life was deeply intertwined with the rhythm of the seasons. In spring, they planted crops such as maize, beans, and squash, harnessing the rich soil to ensure bountiful harvests. Summers were marked by fishing and gathering, as the Occaneechi people ventured into the waters and forests to gather the fruits of the land. Their spiritual connection to the land set them apart. Nestled along the banks of the Roanoke River and the shores of Lake Gaston, they found sustenance in the fertile soil and the abundance of fish and wildlife that surrounded them. The Occaneechi Indians believed that every element of the natural world possessed a spirit, and now their memory has joined those spirits in the mists of time.
Inside Henrico's quaint meeting house, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Despite Nathaniel Bacon being an outlaw, the voters of Henrico County decisively elected him to the House of Burgesses, Jamestown's legislative body. Once in the hallowed halls of the House of Burgesses, sweeping changes were swiftly enacted. The limitations placed on the governor's powers were notable, as was the restoration of suffrage rights to landless freemen. Sale of any arms to any Indian is now subject to the death penalty, echoed the stern proclamation, leaving no room for ambiguity. In a separate meeting hall, fervor among Bacon's followers reached a boiling point. Berkeley refuses to authorize retaliation against the natives because of his own vested interests in fur trading, one man exclaimed, amplifying the crowd's suspicions of Governor William Berkeley's monopolistic endeavors. Outside, on a cobblestone street in Jamestown, tensions between Berkeley and Bacon escalated into full view. Surrounded by their respective armed supporters, the two men locked eyes. Berkeley ripped open his shirt, baring his chest, and yelled, "Here, shoot me!" It was a dare, a raw challenge laced with desperation and bravado. Retreating to the solitude of his plantation, Berkeley finally capitulated. Seated at his ornate desk, he sighed heavily before signing the military commission Bacon had demanded. The ink was barely dry when he realized that he had crossed a point of no return, irrevocably changing the trajectory of a colony on the brink.
Inside the sanctuary of his sprawling plantation home, Governor William Berkeley was a man at war with himself. The room, adorned with rich tapestries and filled with the scent of leather-bound books, seemed to close in on him.
Finally, with a trembling hand, he signed the military commission Bacon had insisted upon. As the ink dried, Berkeley felt the weight of his decisions settle around him, a point of no return eclipsed. Across the rural landscapes of Virginia, Bacon's newly empowered scouting parties took to their tasks with unnerving zeal. Riding from farm to farm, they requisitioned supplies as if entitled by divine right. But it was their actions toward the indigenous peoples that stirred outrage. They killed and enslaved, ostensibly in the name of security. In Gloucester County, the citizenry recoiled at these excesses. The malicious conduct was triggering protests, public meetings, and hushed conversations in the fields and marketplaces. People felt subjected, even violated by their so-called protectors, and the uneasy peace that had once prevailed was now a distant memory. This new era of Virginia colonial life had turned a dark corner, each decision and action amplifying the next in a chain of consequences that was rapidly becoming irreversible. The dirt paths and lush fields of Middle Plantation, a settlement destined to be renamed Williamsburg, became the new backdrop for Bacon's forces. Having retreated here, they found a momentary respite, but also an opportunity to regroup and redefine their cause. Inside a hastily assembled meeting hall, its wooden beams creaking under the weight of tension, Bacon stood before his makeshift army. Together, they crafted the Declaration of the People, a scathing indictment of Governor Berkeley's administration. He has levied unfair taxes, appointed his cronies to high positions, and left our farms open to Indian attacks, Bacon read aloud, his voice tinged with righteous indignation.
But Bacon was far from done. Another document was unrolled on the makeshift podium, a manifesto, this one even more incendiary than the last. It called for nothing less than the complete extermination of all Indians. They have been for many years enemies to the king and country, robbers and thieves, and invaders of His Majesty's right and our interests and estates, he declared, making it painfully clear that in his eyes, the indigenous people had forfeited any claim to legal protection or basic human decency. With each proclamation, the rift between opposing viewpoints widened, and the spiraling events seemed to be pulling Virginia's fragile social fabric apart at its already frayed seams. Under the vast, open sky of Chesapeake Bay, a naval skirmish was unfolding. Boats laden with Bacon's allies cut through the choppy waters of the Potomac, their eyes set on Accomac, where Governor Berkeley had sought refuge. Their masts were tall and sails full, pushed by winds that seemed almost complicit in their mutiny. The mission was audacious, a maritime gambit aimed at capturing the elusive governor and tipping the balance of power irrevocably. As they neared their destination, the tension aboard the vessels was palpable. Each man knew the gravity of their undertaking and what it could mean for the unfolding rebellion back on land. Eyes scoured the horizon, hands gripped weapons, and whispered prayers mingled with the salty sea air. Though driven by a common purpose, the sailors and soldiers aboard couldn't shake the underlying uncertainty of their endeavor. Would they find Berkeley at Accomac? And if they did, what then? Every man aboard faced not only the immediate risks of naval warfare, but also the larger ethical and political quandaries their actions were rapidly unspooling. In the dense, enigmatic expanse of Dragon Swamp, Bacon led his forces in a targeted operation against the Pamunkey tribe. His men, driven by a potent mix of zeal and authority from their newly commissioned leader, swept through the swamp. They seized 3 horseloads of goods, leaving the Pamunkey bereft of valuable resources. Worse still, they captured and enslaved 45 members of the tribe, while killing many others in a spate of violence that left an indelible mark on the community.
Queen Kakakoski, the Pamunkey leader, had a narrow escape, fleeing into the tangled wilderness with her son clutched tightly to her side. Once at a safe distance, she faced a gut-wrenching decision: to throw herself on the mercy of Governor Berkeley's council. With her tribe decimated and her options dwindling, she saw this as a last resort, a desperate bid for clemency in a world increasingly devoid of it. As Bacon counted his spoils and slaves, and Queen Kakakoski weighed her perilous options, the fulcrum of history seemed to wobble. Decisions were being made and lines crossed from which there could be no turning back. The actions of these key players were shaping not just their own destinies, but the very future of a colony rife with tension and complexity. On the eastern shore, Governor Berkeley was far from idle. Determined to regain control and authority, he mustered an army comprised largely of mercenaries, men whose allegiance was as negotiable as it was deadly. The colony had no shortage of idle men who either gave up farming or had recently finished their indenture. Their recruitment was swift, their preparation focused, and their mandate clear: to quash the rebellion and restore the old order. Berkeley's efforts were not confined to land. With volunteers and a variety of vessels, his forces managed to intercept and capture some of Bacon's naval allies on Chesapeake Bay, mostly the type of criminal they would be hunting in the normal course of business. The captured boats were a crucial blow to Bacon's plans and a morale booster for Berkeley's camp. The governor wasted no precious moments in asserting his authority and making a chilling example of the two ill-fated leaders who had dared to challenge his rule. The names of these men were whispered across the colony as infamous thieves and pirates, their reputations preceding them like ominous storm clouds.
With a pen stroke that carried the weight of his office and an unwavering determination to restore order, Berkeley signed the death warrant. The fate of the captured leaders was sealed, their future now destined to be measured in mere hours. Justice, swift and unrelenting, bore down upon them as they were quickly ushered before a tribunal of colonial law. The trial, a mere formality, served as a stark reminder of the consequences of defiance in the face of authority. Guilt had been presumed from the outset, and the proceedings moved with a grim efficiency that left no room for appeals or pleas. And then, with the finality of a hangman's noose, the sentence was carried out. The two men met their fate with a stoic resolve that did little to mask the fear that surely gripped their hearts. The execution, a public spectacle meant to send a chilling message, unfolded swiftly before the assembled onlookers. The drumbeat of authority echoed through the colony as the life of each leader was extinguished, their bodies left to dangle as stark symbols of the price to be paid for defiance. It was a grim display, a somber chapter in the annals of colonial history, orchestrated with a singular purpose: to quash any lingering thoughts of insurrection. The message was clear: Governor Berkeley would brook no challenge to his rule, and those who dared to test his resolve would find themselves on the merciless side of the law. The colony, now bearing witness to this chilling display of authority, would be forever marked by the memory of that day, a reminder that in the unforgiving crucible of history, power and consequence were inextricably entwined. As Berkeley tallied his wins and losses, his mind must have wandered to the broader stakes at hand, the very soul of a colony teetering on the edge. He had acted decisively, but whether his actions would stave off revolution or merely fan its flames remained an open, haunting question.
In a cataclysmic move born of festering resentment, Nathaniel Bacon and his band of rebel followers stormed back into the coastal settlement of Jamestown, Virginia. It was the summer of 1676, and tensions between common settlers and the colonial governor, William Berkeley, had finally boiled over into open conflict. Jamestown, established in 1607, had been the first permanent English colony in North America. The town sat on a marshy island along the James River, surrounded by towering reeds. Its wood and brick buildings included stores, taverns, homes, and the stately church. Though Jamestown remained the capital of the Virginia colony, the town had suffered greatly over the years from fires, floods, famine, and disease, its population dwindling.
Now this historic settlement faced its greatest threat as Bacon and his motley militia infiltrated its streets. They embodied chaos and destruction, ransacking buildings, looting goods, and defacing symbols of British rule. The air grew thick with smoke as they put structures to the torch, the once orderly lanes descending into anarchy. Colonial soldiers and loyalist militia attempted to resist the surprise attack, but Bacon's men showed no mercy. The rebels were past reasoning, their bellies filled with anger against the colonial aristocracy. On the night of September 19th, an ominous glow lit up the skies as Bacon ordered nearly the entire town put to the flame. Within mere hours, proud Jamestown was reduced to smoldering ruins, its halls of governance and stately homes become indistinguishable piles of blackened rubble and ash. Historical relics, official records, and cultural treasures all were consumed by the raging inferno. The rebel torches left nothing but destruction and despair in their wake, consigning Jamestown's stories and symbols to oblivion. It was a grim blow to British rule in the New World, though in time the capital would be rebuilt.
Governor Berkeley, sensing the hopelessness of this situation, fled into the night, a dispirited leader ousted from his own stronghold. But Bacon's men were far from finished. With the governor in flight, they turned their vindictive attention to what remained of the town and its inhabitants, especially those still loyal to Berkeley. Homes were invaded, families terrorized, and the last vestiges of order completely shattered. As the first rays of dawn broke over the charred remains of Jamestown, it became brutally clear that a point of no return had been crossed. The fissures between rebellion and loyalty, between two visions of colonial Virginia, had been torn irreparably apart. Both Bacon and Berkeley had made their moves. The stage was set for whatever would come next, and the colony found itself plunged into a dire, uncertain future. Just when it seemed that Bacon's insurgent momentum was unstoppable, fate intervened in the form of dysentery. Gripped by the merciless ailment, Bacon found himself physically debilitated, a fierce leader rendered vulnerable. Opting for retreat over continued aggression, he withdrew to the sanctuary of his own home to recover. It was a closely guarded secret among the rebels where Bacon was and what was keeping him from appearing in person at the camp. Some passed the word that he was suffering from a light case of smoke inhalation, with a wink and nod about the destruction of the former capital. But John West had the best intelligence network in the colonies and was able to find out the truth, that Bacon was barely alive and trying to recover in his own bed. He went back to the small camp where survivors of the Pamunkey massacre had gathered around his mother, Queen Kakagoski, under the protection of the colony government. He looked at her, and she nodded. He knelt to the bundle of goods that represented his worldly possessions and pulled out his father's knife.
In the dimly lit hours of the night, John West found himself standing at the edge of Bacon's property. The world around him was cloaked in darkness, as if nature itself conspired to shroud his actions in secrecy. With a resolve etched into his features, he ventured forth, navigating through the formidable forest that stood as a guardian to his destination. The defenses that had once guarded this place were now but feeble echoes of their former strength. John West, a solitary figure in this moonless expanse, moved with the silent grace of a shadow, his steps betraying no sound. In his hand, he clutched a weapon as ancient as time itself, a simple knife, a tool of both survival and, in this moment, retribution. As he drew closer to Bacon's house, a structure that had once held secrets and power, John's heart quickened with anticipation. This was his chance to right the wrongs that had plagued him and his kin for far too long. The path he had chosen was fraught with danger, but it was a path he had to tread alone. The night held its breath, as if aware of the gravity of this clandestine encounter. John West, a man driven by a singular purpose, crossed the threshold into the heart of his mission.
a mission that would alter the course of history itself. Within the confines of Bacon's house, the air was heavy with tension, a dark presence that seemed to linger in every corner. John West, having slipped past the remaining defenses, found himself face to face with the man whose actions had ignited a tempest of discord and upheaval. Nathaniel Bacon lay there, a mere shadow of the fiery leader he had once been. The sickness that had taken hold of him had drained his vitality, rendering him frail and powerless. It was a stark contrast to the man who had, not too long ago, rallied followers and stoked the flames of rebellion.
In this pivotal moment, there was no room for hesitation. John West, a man driven by his own convictions, knew that the fate of many rested upon his shoulders. With a determined resolve, he acted swiftly, extinguishing the life of the firebrand leader as abruptly as Bacon had ignited the flames of civil unrest. The room bore witness to the abrupt end of an era, the clash of destinies, and the closing of a chapter in history. John West had carried out a deed that would reverberate through the annals of time, leaving an indelible mark on the unfolding narrative of a nation in turmoil. With Bacon's death, the landscape of the rebellion suddenly shifted. For some, it was a moment of grim satisfaction, the quelling of a dangerous insurgent. For others, it was the cruel theft of a hero and the aspirations he embodied. Either way, Virginia was left with an unsettling void, its future as murky and fraught as ever. With the life of Nathaniel Bacon extinguished, an undeniable void descended upon the rebel forces. Into this vacuum stepped John Ingram, a man of conviction but lacking the charismatic aura that had defined Bacon's leadership. The torchbearer of rebellion, John Ingram assumed the mantle of authority, his shoulders burdened by the weight of an unfolding revolution. Ingram's intentions were noble, his heart aflame with the same desire for change that had driven Bacon's rebellion. However, he lacked the unifying vision and magnetic charm that had once bound the disparate elements of the rebellion together. The rebellion, once a roaring tempest of discontent, began to lose its momentum. Like a ship adrift without a guiding star, it struggled to find its course. The absence of Bacon's charismatic presence left a gaping wound in the movement's spirit. It was a wound that festered with doubts and division. The unity that had once propelled them forward began to fracture, and the rebellion that had held the promise of sweeping change began to unravel. In the annals of history, this moment stood as a testament to the power of leadership, both in its ability to ignite the flames of rebellion and in its absence to cast shadows over the aspirations of those who dared to challenge the status quo. John Ingram, though resolute in his intentions, found himself grappling with the monumental task of filling the shoes of a charismatic visionary, a challenge that would shape the destiny of the rebellion and the course of a tumultuous era. Governor Berkeley, seizing the moment, mounted a counteroffensive. Aiding his efforts was an English naval squadron, a formidable force that tilted the scales in favor of the colonial government. Together, they made quick work of Ingram's disorganized troops, restoring a semblance of order and control. Berkeley triumphantly returned to Jamestown, the town still scarred, but now under his thumb once more. His reclamation of power was swift and unsparing. Properties of known rebels were confiscated, their assets seized and redistributed among his supporters. In a grim finale, Berkeley oversaw the hanging of 23 men involved in the insurrection. Many of these executions occurred without the semblance of a fair trial. Governor Berkeley's victory was complete, but it was a win that came at a steep moral cost. The rule of law had been restored, yet the fissures in Virginia society were more evident than ever. The heavy hand of his governance would weigh on the colony for years to come, a constant reminder of the rebellion and the limits of dissent. In the grandeur of his London throne room, far removed from the chaos of colonial Virginia, King Charles II reportedly made a biting observation about Governor Berkeley. "That old fool has put to death more people in that naked country than I did here for the murder of my father." Whether this comment was genuine or a colonial myth that surfaced 30 decades later is a matter of historical debate. Nevertheless, the sentiment captured the profound disquiet about Berkeley's heavy-handed governance.
Back in Virginia, now with its capital shifted to Williamsburg, Berkeley's authority waned. He was relieved of his governorship, a final blow to a man who had fought so ferociously to maintain his grip on power. Opting to return to England, Berkeley sought to protest his removal and perhaps to salvage what remained of his reputation. But as his ship sailed away from the colony he had so strenuously governed, the repercussions of his actions lingered in the air, a lasting legacy of division and repression that would shadow Virginia for years to come. 6 weeks after setting sail from Virginia, Berkeley landed in London, his body weakened by illness and his spirit shattered by the toll of the voyage. The man who disembarked was a far cry from the once powerful governor who had held sway over a fledgling colony. His allies at court, once a crucial support network, had vanished, replaced by an air of indifference or outright disdain. Haunted by a single overriding desire to clear his name with King Charles II, Berkeley found himself chasing an opportunity that would never come. Before he could secure an audience with the king, before he could argue his case or attempt to salvage his tarnished legacy, Berkeley died. His death marked the end of a contentious chapter in Virginia's history, but it was far from a neat conclusion. The wounds he had inflicted on the colony, both literal and figurative, would take far longer to heal. And so the legacy of Governor Berkeley became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the perils of governance without restraint or compassion. In the wake of Bacon's rebellion, a significant and unsettling shift occurred in Virginia's labor system. Plantation owners, wary of the insubordination and unpredictability demonstrated by indentured servants, began to pivot toward a more controlled and oppressive labor force, enslaved Africans. This transition had far-reaching consequences, codifying a brutal system of racial slavery that would become entrenched in American society. This evolution culminated in the Virginia Slave Codes of 1705, formally titled An Act Concerning Servants and Slaves. Enacted by the colony of Virginia's House of Burgesses, these laws established a comprehensive framework that regulated interactions between enslaved people and colonial citizens. The codes essentially stripped enslaved individuals of any semblance of human rights, reducing them to mere property under the law. The slave codes laid bare the cold calculus of colonial governance, where human dignity was sacrificed for economic gain and social control. The shift from indentured servitude to racial slavery was not just a change in labor dynamics, it was a transformation that embedded racial hierarchy and discrimination into the very fabric of colonial and later American society. The aftershocks of these decisions would reverberate throughout history, shaping the contours of race, power, and inequality for centuries to come.